I would say like say a 2 meters by say 50 inches. So this is in a way what is called the munda. Now this is what we refer to as the single munda, which means it goes once around your waist. You do once and then you just wrap it around. So that's the single munda. Now there is a slightly more elite version of that, which is a finer count, where instead of wrapping it once, you fold the fabric into two because it's much finer, and then you wrap it once. So now that is called a double munda, And when initially during the Chendamangalam phase, when we were trying to sell the products that were here, a lot of people would come back to us and say, we ordered a double munda, but we got just one piece. So we kept saying, the double munda just means it's folded into two. Now, gradually over time, people started wearing something like an angavastra, or in movies, you would see a thinner piece wrapped around like a breastcloth, or that men wear it like an angavastra, or women wear it like a dupatta. Now, that is called a neryada. Now, that is slightly less wide compared to the main munda. Like, for example, if the munda is 50 inches wide, the neryada would be about 42 or 43 inches wide, because it goes on the upper part.
Welcome to the 5th edition of Handloom Talks. And we from the SAARC Business Council WICCI are here once again with a very interesting person, and hoping this is also going to be another interesting session this afternoon. And I have Sumana with me, who is going to introduce our special guest this afternoon. Sumana, would you do the honors?
Of course. Thank you, Dr. Raha. And I'm very glad to welcome Sreejith Jeevan today. He's a design graduate from the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad and ENSAD in Paris. He founded ROUKA in 2014 and debuted at the Lakme Fashion Week through the GenNext platform. He works with Indian textiles from his studio in Kochi, creating a homegrown style that derives from the essence of people, culture, and crafts. Meaning bodice in Malayalam and corridor in Japanese, ROUKA stands for clothing that bridges the weaver and the wearer. Sreejith balances the scales of time through his work between a modern old and the nostalgic new aesthetic. The label works with local artisans to embrace mindful practices while reinventing traditional weaving techniques for our contemporary lives.
Thank you, Sumana, so much. That was Sumana Mukherjee. She's a member of the SAARC Business Council, and she's been with me all throughout the entire series we've been doing. Well, Sreejith, before we actually move into our discussion, first of all, I would like you to tell us about your brand. Like, it's a very interesting thing Sumana said just now. You're trying to bridge the gap between the weaver and the wearer, and that's exactly what we need actually in the handloom industry. So just tell us a bit about your brand before we shoot more questions.
I studied textiles, and I studied textiles at NID, which sort of opens out a very large world to you, because, and I say this in most of my talks, because this is how my teacher started the class in textile. She said, the moment you're born, you're wrapped in a piece of cloth, and the moment you die, you're again wrapped in a piece of cloth. So textile is something that's so, it's such an important part of our lives, not just as something that we wear, but also as something that we be. And so as a textile designer, having graduated from NID, I wanted to, in my own words of those days, I wanted to be a butterfly and really see what part of textile really excited me. And I started working for different people. There was a time when I was teaching textiles. I was working with block prints in Jaipur. I was working with export home textiles in Karur. I was doing so many different projects. I was working for IKEA for 2 years after that. And ROUKA started after all of that. And ROUKA for me was a sort of homecoming, because I really wanted to come back to Kerala and see what I could contribute, and this was, I think, the seed of ROUKA was planted while I was studying in ENSAD in Paris. And when I really showed my portfolio to a faculty, and she really looked at all of it and she said, I really like what you've been doing with your work. But if there's one thing that I want to say as a criticism, it is that it doesn't say anything about where you come from, and that's when it sort of really struck me about how I hadn't really gone back to who I was, where I came from, what my experiences and all of that. So ROUKA sort of began uh, as a sort of soul searching journey where I said, let me really go back and explore what I can do as a designer uh, to sort of say stories that perhaps only I can, you know. And in that process, I stumbled upon a lot of people. And for me, to be honest, the people were the people that I was going to make clothes for, because I mean, in fashion terms, we would call it a market survey, or we would call it uh, defining your client, or customer brief and client brief and all of that. And on the other side were really the people that I was going around looking for, which was the weaver and the people who would actually make these clothes. And at that time, I was also sort of trying to find a name for the label, because I didn't want to call it Sreejith Jeevan. This. I think all of us millennials have this sense of not wanting to put our name and all of that. So I actually sat with a Malayalam dictionary for almost a month till I stumbled upon the word ROUKA. And ROUKA is actually the primitive blouse that women in Kerala used to wear. And I was talking about it to people, and somebody actually told me that in Kerala, women were not allowed to cover their upper bodies, because the traditional garment was cloth wrapped around the waist, or that you could, at the most, drape cloth, on your shoulders. So somebody said that their grandmother would secretly wear a ROUKA when her mother-in-law was not around, because ROUKA was a sense of, had a sense of fashion of that time, and meant being progressive and being, fashionable and all of that. And then I Googled the word ROUKA, and I also came across the fact that it has a Japanese meaning, which means a corridor. And for me, all of this sort of connected the thoughts that were going on in my head, and I'm such an overthinking person, and I felt, yeah, really the work of ROUKA is to connect the people who I am making clothes for, and people who ultimately are going to make it for me. And if I can do that in a fashionable way, and if I can do that in a way that connects both of them, not just in terms of an emotional connect, but also in terms of connection as in business, where there's one partner who's empowering the other, and the reverse, which is also true, because you don't wear nice clothes when there's not anybody to make those nice clothes. So I think ROUKA stemmed out of this logic, and which also in a way has kept us being a corridor, doing the work that we do. Because when I look at every 5 years of the label, we have been very flexible in terms of the kind of changes that we want to bring about, not just in the products that we make, but also in the way we work. For example, we started doing fashion. We started as a purely fashion label. We started doing fashion weeks. We did fashion shows until spring 2018, and after which, in August 2018 is when the floods happened, and then we sort of really changed direction to trying and reviving handlooms in Chendamangalam. To be honest, I wouldn't use the word reviving, because the idea at that point was rehabilitation, because they really didn't have anything, including looms, because everything had been washed away. And so we moved into rehabilitation. From there, we tried reimagining the Kasavu sari, and so every 5-6 years we've remained open to the idea of being a corridor where ideas can move and connect people across rooms. So yeah, it's very flexible.
When you put it so nicely, it's a small little story of your own, and I just love listening to it. But as they say, there's a story behind every weave in handloom industry, and so everyone who gets into the handloom industry also has a story of their own. So you rightly prove it so, Sreejith. But then, before we again move more, there was one question in my mind when we decided upon that you're going to be our guest this afternoon. I thought I would ask you first and foremost about Kasavu. I think many people really don't know about what Kasavu is, and the two-part sari, which somewhat matches with the mekla from the northeast. That is also interesting. I mean, these are the only two regions, I think, where they have this two-part sari. Also, why Kasavu mainly is, white or off-white? Why hardly we see any colors? I would like to, you to answer these questions. These are the questions. These have been in my mind when I stumbled upon Kasavu a long back. So could you please answer these questions first before we move on to more questions?
So I think what's happened post-COVID on Instagram is that the word Kasavu has become a generic term to represent handlooms from Kerala, But to be very honest, I think the way the Kasavu sari is now seen or perceived is very, very new, right? So these are also questions that I have actually sort of tried to answer over the last 10, 15 years. So one thing I know is that the clothing tradition in Kerala is primarily draped, so there's nothing really structured or constructed because everything here is draped. So and it's all very simple. So most of it starts with a wrap around the waist, and it's just a simple wrap. It's not even like the North Indian version of the dhoti where you have multiple, so it's either a wrap, and the width of the fabric is different according to the kind of function that you do. So if I have to just say in terms of fabric, so there is of course the munda, which is I would say a 2 meters by say 50 inches. So this is in a way what is called the munda. Now this is what we refer to as the single munda, which means it goes once around your waist. You do once and then you just wrap it around. So that's the single munda. Now there is a slightly more elite version of that, which is a finer count, where instead of wrapping it once, you fold the fabric into two because it's much finer, and then you wrap it once. So now that is called a double munda, And when initially during the Chendamangalam phase, when we were trying to sell the products that were here, a lot of people would come back to us and say, we ordered a double munda, but we got just one piece. So we kept saying, the double munda just means it's folded into two. Now, gradually over time, people started wearing something like an angavastra, or in movies, you would see a thinner piece wrapped around like a breastcloth, or that men wear it like an angavastra, or women wear it like a dupatta. Now, that is called a neryada. Now, that is slightly less wide compared to the main munda. Like, for example, if the munda is 50 inches wide, the neryada would be about 42 or 43 inches wide because it goes on the upper part. So all of this was just draped or just tied around and all of that, right? Now, gradually, the idea of a sectamunda came in, wherein that you have the bottom and the top as a set, which is sort of draped like the mekla chadar, which is now called the sectamunda. Now, if you look at the women doing Tiruvadra Kali and all of that, the dance that they do in Kerala during Onam and all of that. So for that, they wear a sectamunda now. So, the sectamunda is a slightly later addition. Now, over time, because it's not very easy for a lot of people to adapt to the sectamunda, or because of the national standardization of how the sari has come to be, the sectamunda has now turned out to be a full-fledged sari. So, what is interesting is that all of these are just unstitched pieces of cloth, which has end pieces depending on how they are woven. For example, an neryada will have a line on both sides. The munda will also have a line on both sides. If it is, and then some of it will usually have a border, or it might have a selvage which protects the fabric, even if there's no border. Now, the idea of the Kasavu or the Kasavu actually refers to the zari, and zari is not something that was traditionally made in Kerala. I think zari has always traveled from Saurashtra, because I've heard that even in Kanjivaram, the zari has come through weavers in Kanjivaram who were brought down from Saurashtra, you know. And in Kerala, if you look at it cluster-wise, there's a main cluster which is near Trivandrum, which is called Balaramapuram. And Balaramapuram weavers were brought down by the Travancore kings, I think mainly by the Travancore king named Balarama Varma, which is why it's called Balaramapuram. The cluster that we work with is called Chendamangalam, which is in the central part of Kerala, which is near Kochi. So the Chendamangalam weavers were brought in by this particular aristocratic family called the Palyam family, because they were as powerful as the kings. So they gradually developed a cluster here and they got weavers down. Another important cluster is near Palakkad, which is slightly, it's about 2.5 hours from Kerala, which is called Koothambally. And in Koothambally, the weavers are primarily from Karnataka. So they still speak in Kannada or their local dialect. Further northwards, there is, you know, Kannur, which weaves much coarser gowns, and now what they primarily do are home furnishing. So if you look at Balaramapuram, they do extremely fine gowns of cotton, and they only do pure zari. The Chendamangalam saris are actually slightly coarser compared to, like, for example, if Balaramapuram uses 120s, Chendamangalam will use like an 80s. And then if you go to Koothambally, they have influences of jacquard. You know, they might do borders with Rama, you know, all of that. And then, like I said, Kannur does more coarser gowns. So basically, all of these are stemming out of just different kinds of gowns, but primarily from uncut, unstitched garments. Now, the influence of stitched garments in Kerala has mainly come because of colonization. Also because Kodunallur, Kochi, Trivandrum were all important ports. And, you know, we've had all people, the Dutch, the Portuguese, you know, British, French, all of them have come in, and, you know, there have been all kinds of influences. And gradually, I think with colonial influences, with conversion, there have also been Arabic travelers. So you will gradually see that the Muslim women started wearing constructed blouses. The Christian women started wearing blouses which are more like what we call the chemise, you know. So they started pairing the local kind of cloth with their clothing culture as well. Like, for example, if, like, say, the Hindu Nair women would wear a setumunda, the Christian women would wear it with a stitched top, but with a munda underneath. And that was called a chatta and a munda, right? So gradually, all of these. So, like, for example, during my grandmother's time, the standardized sari did not exist. She would still wear a setimunda at home, you know, or her mother-in-law, like my grandfather's mother, they would wear a chatta and munda at home. So the sari standardizing is actually something that's very, very new. Now, what I find very interesting is that when we started doing something with the Kasavu, there were a lot of people who said, don't mess with the Kasavu. The Kasavu is so beautiful. Don't mess with it. I said, there's nothing to mess with it because it's changed so much in the last, 100 years. There's nothing traditional about it, other than the fact that our memory only shows us up to what we remember. But Kasavu, like I was trying to tell you, refers to only the zari. And that is not something that people wore every day. Like a lot of people think that people wore Kasavu every day. It is actually the white cloth that people wore every day, but it would have thin borders, dyed borders, which in a way, the saris are also called Kaitri saris because Kaitri refers to handloom. And I think it's an Instagram phenomenon that all the Kerala saris have now gradually been referred to as Kasavu. But it's also interesting to see how all of these kind of different fabrics were created in different counts and different details in the end pieces. Maybe some of them had a line, some of them had a little temple motif called the chutti, some of them would just have a little selvage, some of them would have a thin check, some of them would have a coarser check. Now, these were all meant to denote the different classes who wore these fabrics, So patterned cloth were only worn by the worker class, in fact, I remember in 2013, I went and met one weaver and I said, can we try a few stripes and checks on the Kasavu? And he got curious, he said, I only make stuff for the elite. That's when I actually started thinking about these fine details, because it's these really tiny details that distinguish between these things. Even now, you cannot go into a temple wearing a munda if it has a check on it, because it's supposed to denote casual, it's supposed to denote workwear. But so I think even in this, little palette of unstitched cloth, there was so much meaning and metaphor and things like that. But yeah, so I think it's like the term Kasavu is actually a generic term that we meaning like Instagram has now coined to represent handlooms of Kerala, because there's really no other sort of term, like how we say Banarsis. There's really no way to refer to everything that's made in Kerala.
Thank you so much. Well, that's another interesting story, because I really wanted to listen to it. But like you said, from during the COVID times, and then the onset of the online marketing and everything, and so people really then got to know. So that's how people know. So I think it was, I wanted people to know more about these particular type of clothing which comes from Kerala. Well, another question which leads actually from the beginning, what you said, what I wanted to ask is, when you came into this particular, handloom industry, and then how does it feel? Because this is what is the story going around, that the next generation of the weavers, they're not coming into this particular industry back again. And that is how the handloom industry is slowly fading out. I will not use the other term. So is that true? And what is the way out? Like, how do we get them back? Because that is the only way, maybe, I think we can make it more vibrant. Because us coming into this particular industry is, we are more of a passion. But once people take it up as their means of livelihood, maybe that is how we can keep it alive. Just like farming never dies because we don't stop eating. So, and the farmer's child comes back to the farmland, right? So, but then the weaver's child is not coming back to the weaving industry. So how is it? What is this scenario now, and how do we change it?
So, Kerala works very differently, because we've already got a taste of how things are going to be, for two reasons. One, in Kerala, weaving is not like a family, it's not handed down over family, because all the weavers, they work as cooperative societies. So the concept of what we perhaps will see in the other states in the next maybe few years or decades, we've already seen in the past, maybe say 10, 15 years. So they all work in cooperative societies, and so the handing down from one generation to other has already stopped. So now the real question is, who is going to take it up, if not from father to son or from mother to daughter? So what we've seen is that it is, for example, in Chendamangalam, it is the women who get married into the village who now has to decide if she should go and work as a sales girl or should she come and take up weaving. So the real question for them is, do I take up weaving, which gets me this much money, or do I become a sales girl, which gets me 800 rupees per day? Or for male weavers, it's like, do I weave a sari for this many days and get 1,000 rupees or 2,000 rupees? Versus, do I go as a painter or a carpenter, and get 800 or 900 rupees a day, and in many cases a bottle at the end of the day, apparently. So this is really what is deciding what will what the next generation should do. So, like you said, if there are people who will pay the money, then gradually they are ready to come and work. So it's moved from, I think, something which was sort of like a passion driven, or like a culture driven, or or like, how do I put it, like the burden of having to protect culture is already off their heads. So now it really has become another job. Now, which is fair enough, because they've also seen a generation which struggled to make ends meet where there's no money. So when we started working with Kasavu initially, we would go and tell them that, this is fine, you do this. And they would constantly tell us, no, this is not going to sell for this price, because, who's going to buy this for 5K, 6K, or 10K, or whatever. And because that's how much they would need. And so when we first did the launch, we made sure that the weavers were there, for them to actually see that people are getting excited about it and buying it and wearing it and all that. So it took us a while to convince them that it's possible to do it. But this is really where I feel the skill is going to go down. And if they're able to get that kind of money, from products, more people will gradually come in. But it's also about continuity, because what happens with a lot of times, I mean, in fact, I was doing a reel about it the other day, where I was saying that, a lot of the times design intervention, or like a fashion collection, works once with a cluster, but then it's that one season, and then what happens the next season? See, they get a huge order, they prep themselves up for that kind of capacity. But then what happens? That trend moves off, which is also why sometimes a lot of people come and tell us that, why are you pricing it at 6K, 7K? You should have priced it at 30K, and made it fashion and made it, really luxury and all of that. But, so sometimes I tell them that my paranoia really is that I don't want to just make it one trend that comes in. I get 10 people to buy it at 30K. And then people are like, oh, we have one of these, we don't want this anymore, let's go to the next. So the task really is to be able to constantly keep giving them orders, so that the looms are running, so that they don't have to go find another. I heard this about Kanjivaram as well, that a lot of weavers took up, they would just go for catering jobs, because during COVID, the sales had gone down. Nobody wanted to take stock. And they were like, once they got a taste of what these catering jobs were, you go one day, 1,000 rupees. They're like, wow, this is easy money, and then they don't want to come back to this, because this is an extremely difficult thing to do. And so I think it takes a lot of consistency to be able to get each cluster running and constantly. So when we started working with Chendamangalam, the main issue was this for us, that the white sari in Kerala is so associated with Onam and Vishu that nobody wants to wear it. Even people in Kerala don't want to wear it on another day. Because if you wear a white sari to office, people will either ask you if you went for a wedding in the morning, or if you went to the temple in the morning, or if it is your star birthday for which people go to the temple, or if it's November 1st, which is the Kerala Piravi Day. That's the birthday the day Kerala was formed. So this semiotic association with white and gold was so strong that people in Kerala wouldn't buy it. And these people were constantly making this. But what happens is that when it comes to an Onam or Vishu, people are like, we are wearing it for this one sadhya that we have to go to. Why spend 10K? We get powerloom options. It's 500 rupees, and just give it to somebody, or give it to somebody, they'll hand paint on it, or they'll do something. And so our main focus was on creating something that didn't look Onam and Vishu, so that the money was not seasonal. In fact, we gradually added color. The first thing we did was one, we made the saris a lot more maximal because we realized even weddings in Kerala are not that minimal anymore. Bollywood has seeped in everywhere. Even when you wear a white and gold, you don't want to look too basic. You want to be bling. So one thing that we did was we made the Kasavu really bling. We said, it's white and gold, but it's bling. It's good. It looks rich. You can wear it for a wedding. It's your and people would instantly take to it because weddings had really got an open air. There were these brunches. A lot of weddings in Kerala, in Kumarakom, Alleppey, where it was out in the open, and people were just literally sweating in their kanjivarams and dying. So we were like, this white and gold cotton is your instant solution to it. Then what we did was we said, why should it be white and gold? Let's do a black. And we started doing a series of black Kasavu. And what was so interesting about the black Kasavu was that it instantly took it out of temples and traditional events to suddenly being a cocktail sari, your evening reception sari, because the entire way people styled it was so different. We would get images in black Kasavu with tube tops and halter necks and crystals, and we were like, wow, it's so nice because the comfort part of the Kasavu or the cotton hand-woven sari is so good that why wouldn't people want to wear it in another? We started doing saris all through the year in different colors as capsule collections. So I felt what handloom needs generally is consistency, and the money has to constantly keep going back. And what happens a lot of times is that it also becomes too emotional. Like we would also go back to the weavers and tell them that like we don't believe in saying that we want to save you and we want to we're going to protect you and all of that. We work as partners, so we want stuff on time, so that, like, say you're doing a series of red saris for us, make sure you give it to us 2 months before Christmas. We will make sure that we sell it for you. So I think what our idea of working with craft has been to create some sort of consistency, create some sort of professionalism also with the society, so that we're both accountable to each other. And I think that what was interesting was that they also started realizing that over 2 years they became debt free. They didn't have to depend on the usual cycle of having to give stock to an emporia and then wait for years to get payment. Because this cycle is so important for them to buy yarn and get dyeing done, and so we tell them we should also work like how small designer businesses work, because then it's easier for anybody to work with.
Thanks once again. Interestingly put. I think you answered my next question. It was something like, in this age of fast fashion, like what is the need to wear handlooms? And you've answered it. This innovation is what is actually needed. But when you're mentioning about, that white sari and the gold becoming, people asking like, why did you come from a wedding or from a religious function? Well, yes, I've seen this group of ladies coming from Kerala and specifically walking into these outlets, and they're asking for the start cotton saris, which we make in Bengal, and which are absolutely very colorful, and some have striking borders. And these are a very, favorite of these ladies who coming from Kerala and shop here in Bengal. So you sort of brought that nostalgia to me. Well, but then we look forward that white and gold, isn't it, Sumana? I mean, that is a very popular one with us. So we usually want to wear that to any special function we have here, because we believe, I believe, but particularly it goes very well with the gold ornaments, and you look so graceful in that sari of of white and just gold, a thin border with a beautiful palla. Yeah. Well, I can go talk about saris the entire day if you want me to talk about. Sumana, would you like to ask the next question? What is in your mind? I mean, I've been blabbering since the outset.
No, it's been a lovely discussion, and I'm glad you pointed this wedding outfit thing. I think this is the same conversation we had in a little little segment when we were doing the magazine interview, you clearly
Yeah.
said that this is India, this is humid country. You cannot wear those kind of outfits that you always see on screens. And like you
I
said,
think
I
India
think
is now waking up to the idea after a heat wave in Europe. So
yeah, yeah. Finally. And sometimes it's true, I have attended a couple of weddings with the bride side. They were a Malayali, and we all wanted to wear the white and gold. We expected everyone, but there was a dress code which made us wear a lot of bling and colors. So I get the point, sometimes even when the guests want to look that perfect traditional way, there are newly choreographed perfect weddings that don't allow. But sometimes do you think that because you don't price your sarees at an astronomical price point, and there is a trend I'm seeing among brands, especially they want to be called sustainable, and they just increase the budget so that it appears premium. So what you're doing runs the economy, but do you ever feel that you get from the customers, oh, maybe they're not authentic because it's not like 30K? Do you ever get that?
like I don't know if you've been following my Instagram. I'm going through midlife crisis and we're questioning what sustainability is, because there's nothing called sustainability. Let's be honest, because I think many of us designers who were initially the young bunch at Fashion Week and all of that, whenever we get together, we talk about sustainability being such a key concept that even we bought into a few years ago. You can be conscious. You can be conscious of what you're putting into a garment. You can be conscious of what it is. But to say that something is sustainable is a joke. Because imagine you make a product which is completely sustainable. You're going to have it to, sell it in lakhs. Because if you don't sell it in lakhs, then it's going to be unethical, which is again not sustainable. Because if you're going to grow your cotton organically and then hand spin it and then hand weave it and hand dye it and hand embroider it and hand stitch it, this one white shirt is going to cost you 70K. Now, if at least 20% of the community doesn't buy this one sustainable shirt, then there is no sustainability at all. So we are all questioning what sustainability is. But I think the easiest analogy to sustainability that I think, that I connect to is food. We are all now being a lot more conscious about the food. It's not that we don't eat junk, but we know we're eating junk. And at least we are aware that we're eating junk. Like we were a generation that would crave to have a burger from McDonald's, but we don't give that to our children anymore because we know it's that bad. So it's the same with clothing. We've all gone through that phase and we've all, questioned sustainability or been part of it. But what is interesting is that there is so much awareness, there's so much being spoken about sustainability, that at least in parts of the production of every garment or product, people are investing in wanting to be conscious. Whether it is saying that, okay, let me at least dye this properly, or even if say I'm dyeing it chemically, let me at least make sure that the water doesn't go into the river, or the fact that, okay, this is hand woven, hence it, sustains a certain skill, it sustains employment somewhere. So that is where sustainability can sustain, to be honest. Beyond that, it is impossible. Now, the idea for me to want to be sustainable is to also be able to, like I said, the idea for us is to empower the weaver and the wearer. And for me, if I am able to get a certain profit out of my product, and if my weavers are paid well, I think it is good enough for this cycle to run, instead of having to price it for fashion and then to say that, my God, it's so it's so expensive, and then having to do a sale. We go on sale. I mean, in fact, there's a sale that we're starting today, but the sale is only for 40 pieces because that's all we are left with. We don't have dead stock. And that for me is successful, because we used to initially work with fashion, and we would make a lot of stock and we would give it off to all the stores. And, months later, the stock comes back saying, this was sold, this was not sold. And then we're trying to do a sale to get rid of the stock. For me, that is not sustainability. So when we're all like moving into our 40s and all of that, we're all trying to protect our calm more than the brand wanting to get, because I think the only people we want to convince is ourselves at this point. So for me, like for example, I get a lot of both the extremes. And when I showcase in Delhi and Bombay and all that, people tell me, if you sell this sari for 10K, people are not going to buy it. They will say it's too cheap, And in Kochi, people come and tell me, why is cotton so expensive? So I literally exist in two different worlds. But for me, it's like, okay, if the weaver is woven the sari for this much and they've got their wages and I've got my money, it's fine, because I know that once they buy it for 10K, they'll come back for more. They'll pick up more. And sometimes they come and they pick up a lot, because they know it's good for gifting. They can give it off to 10 people. So I'm fine being in that space as long as I know that, we're calm. Like, I think the word now is nervous system regulation, right? So as long as everything is regulated, we're all calm.
Yeah. Okay. We're talking about the rising heat. What about the rains? Because Kerala also has heavy rainfall, as much as we here have in this part of the country. And rains have been really heavy and bad, I might say. So how far is it justifiable in wearing handlooms during the rainy season? This question came to my mind in the morning. I was telling Sumana, this is what I need to ask you. Handlooms and the rains. I mean, is it justifiable? Like, do we avoid handlooms when it rains, or we can carry on with handlooms?
It's a bit of a contradiction as well, in the sense that I think a lot of people who can afford handloom are not really in the rains. So I think the cycle is safe there. But I am somebody who wears cottons and handlooms, and I think it's fine.
Yeah, but because even if it's just raining, the heat does not reduce as much.
The heat doesn't reduce, and
so handlooms allows you to actually live peacefully and in this kind of humid.
And, and also I think it's like exactly like how I was talking about food, right? We're like all the people I know, or like sometimes I when we do a client study, like or like say when my designers or assistants, they do a client study, I just send them out, just look at people, actual people. I tell them, don't sit with your laptops and just be like ambitious modern woman, 40s, earns this much. I'm like, that is fake. You go meet an aunt of yours, who's making this money, and you just ask her, how do they live, and in that sense, it's a lot like food, like it's not like just because I'm a Malayali, I eat a sadhya every day, I eat everything, so I think our wardrobes are also a lot like that. We have a mix, and we know how to layer things up, and especially I think post perhaps one thing that Instagram has done nicely is to make everything look Instagrammable, right? Even with the clothes and all of that. So people are a lot more conscious, and even when we step out for coffee, they want to make sure that this might end up being a post somewhere, so let's just dress well. So people layer up well. They know how to mix and match. A lot of people have like an extra layer in their cars sometimes. They add on a scarf. They so I think we've all learned to sort of and especially I think in India, like because like people working in corporate jobs, they sometimes they take a metro and then they reach this glass cave where they're sitting inside Antarctica, and then they know they have to put on like a blazer or something just to make sure that they don't freeze themselves. And then again they step out of it when they get back to tropical weather. So I think Indians have found our way somewhere. I think it's Europe which is struggling. There's a heat wave and they don't know what to do and they're dying. So we have always found a way around rain and heat, and So I think we will survive, and handlooms will also. Yeah.
Absolutely, we are resilient, right?
Yeah, really.
We have this interesting question for you. If you could tell us in 3 words, like, describe handloom in 3 words, which 3 words aptly describes handloom?
I think it's timeless craftsmanship and belonging or belongingness.
Connected to your roots.
Yeah, some sort of a connection. Because I think most of the time people buy handlooms because there's a connect to it. It's an instant bond that you make, and especially as somebody who there are times when I sometimes like my friends who know me from school. I was a very bling person, because when we were in school we were of course always in wonder of like the 90s pop and the indie, that phase, right? Alicia Chinoy and Suchitra and all of them, yeah. So from that very bling phase to the NID days and all of that to being who I am now, where I'm sort of being modern yet so rooted. I think it is when you actually see how something is made, and like you really have to go to pattern to really understand the extent of work that's gone into a pattern patola. Months and months of work to create something, and or even when we actually leave a sample, for our textile submissions, you realize the amount of not just physical but also emotional, labor that's gone into it. So I think this whole revival of culture or handloom and all of that has also happened because of the amount of content and information that we are exposed to. Because perhaps in the 90s we didn't really get to see so much on TV, or because there was no internet. And, like it was like, for example, I would refer to my grandmother's jamdanis as grandmother saris at that time, because she would have these beautifully starched jamdanis that she would wear to church, every Sunday, and in these beautiful pastel colors. And that time we didn't know how to appreciate a jamdani, so it really took us to see how the jamdani is done for. Now we go in search of jamdanis, and we're like, so I think this kind of connection really helps to sustain handlooms. And what also happened with Europe, if you look at it, is that the connect was always with fashion, right? The connect was always to a trend. This is in trend, so all of you wear this. This is in trend, so all of you wear this. But they weren't realizing that they were actually wiping off so many centuries of craft or tradition. That now, if you go to Europe, they're only museum pieces. It's not a living tradition. It's not something that you are wearing. Like for example, a sarong for men comes back as a trend, but like in Kerala, everybody still wears a dhoti. In fact, there was an interview that somebody did where they said, we work a lot with dhotis. How do you see the revival of dhotis and all of that? I said, I didn't revive any dhoti, because it's still a living tradition. You look at all the politicians in Kerala, they're all wearing a dhoti. my father, my grandfather, everybody's wearing, they're all wearing a mundu. So it's very much a tradition that's alive because everybody's wearing, The only thing I have done is to create a new line of those. So you can't call it revival. It's just reimagining what it is. And that is only because when I came back, I left for NID in 2005. And then I've not lived in Kochi until 2013 when I came back. So after that span of 8 years, I came back to Kochi, and then I realized, wow, there are a lot of places where I can actually wear a munda, But is there a munda that I would like to wear? No, it's not there, So then we said, why don't we try more contemporary stripes? Why don't we do this? Why don't we make the borders bigger? Why don't we do that? So it was just reimagining it for an audience which perhaps doesn't have access to it. But we've not done any revival. So the culture is already there. So the whole idea is to say, how are we going to make sure that the culture is alive so that, it's like saying only there's an ocean you can get your waves. So it's like that.
Absolutely. Well, yes, that is how we are going to keep it alive, isn't it? Because as time moves on, everything develops. So these motifs, the pattern, the styles need to develop to suit the modern mind, actually.
Yeah.
So that is how, like you said, is there something which I can wear? So when you put in your...
Sorry to interrupt, but just like you were saying, so craft has always had patrons. If you look at every craft cluster or every craft tradition, there's always been a patron. There was a king, there was somebody.
Absolutely, yes.
But now we don't have patrons. We only have customers. And we have customers who have the money to be patrons. So it might not be one king who will buy, one sari that you have to impress them with. It's probably, thousands of people who can buy it for that price. And sometimes I think it's not that expensive also. Like for example, if 5 people go for a buffet, it'll cost you 10K easily or more. In a decent restaurant, which is just a sari, which you're going to wear many times. So
yeah, handed down also. Handloom.
Handed down also, yeah. Like a coffee will cost you, more than a t-shirt these days. So why not get a better t-shirt?
Absolutely. But that is why maybe handlooms still exist, right? Because
Yeah.
as you said, we have our tradition, our culture. We are firmly rooted actually in our culture. So that is how we're keeping it alive. Sumana, anything else you want to add on to?
Yes, the finance part of it. Like you said, it's not that expensive. We keep saying that handlooms are very expensive. Have you seen the prices of sneakers and bags? So I won't even go. It's like buildings.
Yeah.
But you have been a designer. A designer who has run a brand successfully before Instagram, after Instagram. How do you say, there is a huge shift, but how is that shift helping you to run this business?
I wouldn't say before Instagram, after Instagram. I would really say before COVID, after COVID, because Instagram was still there when we started. It was in a very, in fact, 2014 when we were showing at Fashion Week, the word of the year was selfie. Because Instagram had sort of done that. But there was a certain process with which you had to reach the customer. Like, for example, even when we did a fashion week, the fashion week gave a certain preview to a certain audience, and then it trickled down to the stores. There were these high-end stores who had privilege and access to you. From there, it would, of course, go in and trickle down theory, all of that. What really happened after COVID was that Instagram sort of really made it a very democratic space, where it's just you and your product and thousands of people, so from doing a preview in a store and meeting 50 people, we reached a space where you do a reel and you reach 26,000 people. Now, 26,000 people can decide if they want to buy that one sari or not. So your feedback is instant. you'd really, you'd really know if this is something that so many thousands of people actually want, or if in these thousands of people, who are the people who you want to reach out to, or who will reach out to you. So I think what it's really done is it's broken all barriers, it's broken all boundaries, and you are really sitting here with your product and your storytelling and what you want to convey. So I think it's very good, in spite of the fact that we get copied left, right, and center. In fact, last year we made a big fuss because there were a few other brands which had, like 10, 12 times our following, who had made the exact replicas of the saris. And in fact, a lot of people do, because during Onam, they come to our page and use it as a Pinterest board, and they just send it off to their designers, maybe. And, so the replicas come out everywhere. But in spite of that, I still feel what Instagram or, social media has done is to really create a level playground, which is, I think, fair. And I'm sure it's also helped a lot of craftsmen, because what I see more than the children of craftsmen coming into weaving, a lot of children of craftsmen are actually coming in to create pages to market what is being made. Whether they're reaching out to other designer labels to say, do you want us to make something for you, and all of that. But I feel it's become a very very democratic sort of a space.
Right. So aptly said, actually. Well, that is the present scenario. Sumana, anything else, or should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think it was a very nice conversation. If any of the our audience members would like to interact and ask any question, please feel free. And if you don't want to switch on camera, that's also fine, but go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, sir. My question is that except the Kasavu sari in Kerala, what other special saris that are mainly there in Kerala?
So Kerala doesn't have actually too many different kinds of saris, but like I said, it's primarily cotton saris in different counts. And, so like, for example, if you go to Balarampapuram, you will see more of the very fine, like I said, 120 counts and all of that in cotton. They use a lot of pure zari. They use a lot of inlay, sort of in a way similar to like the Jala technique, I think, of Banaras, but where they actually create motifs and all of that. Then, like I said, in Chenamangalam, they do more slightly coarser. So it's still in the 80s sort of a count, which also make for very good workwear saris. And, traditionally they just do like colored borders, and they do small hand-picked motifs in that. They are called Chennamangalam saris. So basically they just refer to the place it's made in. Uttambali is where they do a lot of whites, but the counts are actually very similar to Chennamangalam. But they also do jacquards. So they do, so you will see if it's like an ornamental, fully patterned kind of a Kasavu sari in the pallu, then it's most probably from Uttambali. And Kannur side also, they do more like, like workwear saris or like very simple cottons. And I think the reason, in fact, you were pointing out initially about why the Kasavu saris are white, and, so I've sort of, tried and spoken to a lot of different people. And so the poetic interpretation is that because everything is green and, beautiful and all that, people just wear white. But I think that's just a poetic kind of an interpretation. There was another one that recently did the rounds on Instagram saying it's because we are all very conscious of our rivers and we don't want to pollute the rivers, which perhaps is true to a certain extent. What I've also come to realize is that Kerala is a place with heavy rains almost all through the year, except for maybe the summer months. So dyeing is practically impossible to do, So one way that they would add color is by keeping the main part of the body unbleached and by just adding small elements of color to where it matters, depending on how they wore it. So they would add little bits of color to the end pieces. They would add small motifs here and there, you know. So I feel that is perhaps a more rational reason as to, because if you look at it weather-wise, Kerala has very high rain, and the landscape is green forests and green, and the main money-generating profession is always agriculture and paddy. So land was always used for agriculture, and there were rivers, there was flooding and all of that. But if you look at Tamil Nadu, which comes in the rain shadow region, they always wore silk and they used color, like for example in Ahmedabad, when earlier before the Sabarmati project and all came in, I've heard that whenever the Sabarmati would dry up, they would use the riverbed to dry the block printed fabric, and I used to have these beautiful images of the riverbed just having long yards of fabric all block printed and put to dye because the weather supported it. And one of the reasons that I think they wove cotton in Kerala is because when it's humid, it's easier to weave cotton more than silk because the wet strength of cotton is much higher when it's humid. So it made sense to weave cotton and also to wear cotton. So yeah.
I think it's been a very interesting session. I really loved listening to you, and you can understand more. Why they say handloom is an emotion. Like Papa Dito says, it's an emotion. So talking to you, we can realize when that emotion has to be there. If you really come and work at the ground level with handlooms, you need to have that emotion. And then comes the attachments, going to your roots, and like you mentioned, your grandmother, your grandfathers, so many times. So see, as a child, you've been noticing it, and that is why you are in this industry right now. It's there actually. It has been always there in you, which now has flowered. That's what I feel.
Thank you so much.
So wishing you all the best actually, and hoping that more and more people like you come to this industry, they come back to the place of their origin so that this craft remains alive and we also, survive and that emotional attachment to our root stays forever so that it does not die. Like you said, it's in the Western world, it's there in the museums. Yeah, if you visit the museums in the Western world, you see these beautiful dresses worn by the kings and the queens, no longer worn by anyone else anymore. But unlike that, we, for any traditional program and functions, we still prefer to wear our traditional dresses and our style. So that is a great
luxury,
Yes,
luxury to be able to do that.
Absolutely. So let's hope we can keep on doing it forever and forever.